Greetings everyone and welcome to the BlastCast. I am Jarvis, and with me as always is the master of the Su-27, or at least attempted to be, Lightning Dragon.
Yeah, because I had one successful landing, therefore I am the master.
This week on Around the Verse, it was mostly about kiosks and the Vandal Blade. The kiosk functionality sounded pretty standard, pretty typical what you see in most games out there. You know, things that you can buy because they're in inventory or can't buy because they're not. Obviously, larger items aren't going to be shown in the front of the shop. If you need to buy a new reclaimer engine, you're not going to be able to pick that up and inspect it. The functionality is pretty standard to what you see in a lot of other games like Elite Dangerous and things like that. One of the things I did like that they talked about was how that shops have a sphere around them. Now, within that sphere, when a shop is basically marked out, if they want to add another kiosk, all they have to do is drop a kiosk into that area, into that sphere, and it links up with that shop, allowing them to quickly add more kiosks as necessary without doing a whole bunch of other setup. That's actually pretty smart. Reverse the Verse was also just more of the kiosk, so if you want to know more about it this week, just check that out as well. It's really not something I want to get into too much in this show because I think you're doing a pretty good job on it so far. The other thing they went into is the Vandal Blade and kind of the changes that went into the Vandal aesthetic. I would expect some of these changes to be applied back into some of the existing Vandal ships that are already in the game. They're more of an organic kind of look than even before. Now, in the Calling All Devs, there was a couple of things in there that we wanted to talk about. The first one that kind of caught my eye, or my ear, so to speak, is the whole quantum drive setting destinations, setting more than one destination at a time, or setting up waypoints that will let you go on a much longer trip. Now, what they have intended to do is that if you set up like a trip to, let's say, 3 systems over, and you select the final destination, basically it would lay out a series of travel points that you could go along to get to that final destination. Now, what they want to do is that you can actually pick up those points and move them around a little bit and customize that trip to avoid areas you maybe don't want to travel through. Now, I hope that those lines, that when it auto-generates it, not only can you move the points, but you can actually split the lines to give you more points to let you kind of really create a more customized path. Sometimes you're going to be going through some areas that maybe you really would rather have more of a zigzaggy path and drop in and out as needed to avoid certain problems. We'll have to see how that develops, but so far, that sounds pretty good. Here's one that had some interesting implications. They started talking about the VTOL thrusters and how they would be significantly more powerful than the other thrusters, potentially. They wanted to know, basically, if the less agile ships would have their maneuverability decreased when flying non-horizontally. They said it was partially already implemented in 3.14. For example, the Reclaimer needs to have its engines down in a landing mode in order to stay aloft. But my question on that is, if the lower thrusters are going to be more powerful in ships to work for VTOL gameplay for landing on planets, why is the focus on flight still not pitch and roll? Because that's actually a perfect mechanic to go along with it. If the lower MAVs are stronger, then to me, up and down, so to speak, is a more correct way to go than, you know, strafing left, strafing right, like we have now.
This also adds a secondary thing they probably overlooked in the fact that if you have better down thrusters, you need to compensate with better up thrusters. So let's just say they're 200% stronger than your double strength, right? So if you thrust straight up, it's going to take you twice as long to slow down from, like, you know, thrusting left or right, for example, or forward backwards. And even forward backwards is arguable because that's where your main engines are. And in short, they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. It almost physically hurts me to hear about how they're changing things, because it's like they have absolutely no idea what they're doing.
Well, there's a disconnect. You know, you've got this disconnect between the point-and-click aim to fly methodology, the promise of, you know, taking into account G-forces, and then the flying basically going opposite to what you would do or what you would want if you're accounting for those G-forces, but now saying that they wanted to take into account VTOL, which I'm all for, mind you. But to me, this tells me they need to completely just change flight. Going to the pitch and roll model, which is what you would see to be physiologically correct so human being can actually withstand G-forces at its best goes in line with us. So the main thing I want to talk about today was throttle control. Now, not so much about the method of throttle. We talked about that before in the past, the difference between an acceleration throttle and what I like to call a cruise control throttle, which is where you just set the speed and the ship constantly just gets up to that point.
Well, you'd think so, but not in Star Citizen's case. Yeah, it kind of has a mind of its own. Oh, boosters, huh? Well, sure, as long as you don't touch anything, you can continue to go this speed. Oh, what? You hit left slightly? Well, you're out of boost mode.
And that's exactly the problem I want to talk about. See, taking the throttle out of a player's hands is a bit maddening. Now, we have this stage 1 and the stage 2 afterburner, and as you know, if you're flying straight, everything's fine. But the second you touch the controls, basically, it starts to reverse your speed, starts to go back into normal SCM speeds. Now, if you recall back in if you recall back in 2.5, if you were decoupled, you could actually fly with normal acceleration just by basically having the throttle up. Didn't matter how much. You could get up to the quote-unquote ship cap speed just with normal flying, without boosters, without anything. That's a mechanic I really miss, and I feel it needs to come back. And in fact, when you're doing this, once again, not a fan of the mechanic, but this afterburner stage 1 and this afterburner stage 2, if you're trying to turn, there should be different ways of approaching the problem of keeping the pilot alive. For example, if you had G-Safe on and you were going, let's just throw out a number, 1,000, and a turn at that speed could possibly kill the pilot, instead of pulling the speed back, you limit the rotations, as we talked about in the rotation conundrum.
Yeah, pretty much anything I say here will just be retreading old ground, but for the sake of people that haven't watched every single one of our episodes, the idea, it's almost directly pulled out of Elite Dangerous. In the lower your speed is, the more power you have to divert to your thrusters, which means you can, turn faster, obviously within boundaries of G-forces, that their acceleration value is applied there, and, up to, I don't know, like maybe 5 Gs be like the most, and that'd be over a certain percentage of time. As you get closer and closer to your top speed, obviously the amount of Gs for your turn will be much smaller. So like if you're going 500 meters per second, you can't do a 5G turn because you already have so many Gs in your forward velocity. So maybe you can only do like a 2G turn because you're hitting that 5G cap.
Yeah, you're factoring in acceleration into that, right?
Yes, I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because like I said, you might only be able to do a quote 2G turn at 500 meters per second because you already have the acceleration of that 500 meters per second forward velocity. So that's where your limited turning comes in. So you're sacrificing maneuverability for speed, and that's a gameplay mechanic. So if you throttle back, you get more maneuverability. So in a dogfight, when you want to be very maneuverable, you don't want to be just going super crazy fast.
Right, and this also brings back in the rules for like the boom and zoom and whatnot, because you're dealing with the fact that those ships that automatically kind of turn slower anyway, they're going to want to take advantage of higher top speed or higher acceleration to make sweeping attacks, and we covered that in adding variation to flight mechanics. For me, the big problem, as I said, that the general core of it is slapping the control of your throttle out of your hands, or there are other ways to limit it. Now, if you're doing, let's say you're going 1,000 and you shut G-Safe off, at that point in time, the player should be able to push past what the G-Safe does for rotation at the additional risk of potentially blacking out or dying, for that matter. That's the one of the important parts of any sort of flight game, is walking that edge. But I've never seen a game that goes, okay, well, you want to turn now? Let me throttle back for you. Acceleration and throttle control is key in flight games. That is as deep of a skill as anything else. Now, Lightning Dragon and I have been playing a decent amount of DCS this week because, as I said, I wanted to get into it and try it out. And he will attest, learning that throttle as we're trying to fly side by side, it's a skill that takes a lot of effort. You'll see that later this week when we cover our first 3 play sessions. The first one was alone, the last 2 were with Lightning. But we tried to even fly in formation, and just manipulating the throttle is a full-time job if you're not familiar with the nature of what he was flying, which was an SG-27. What I was flying was an F-15. Well, he was flying SG-27 on the second day. But basically, different planes have different accelerations and whatnot. The point is that the throttle manipulation and control is so important. Like, we don't need a boost mechanic, okay? Basically, all we need is a throttle, heat, and fuel, right? You get past a certain point, you start burning way more fuel and building up way more heat, but get way more acceleration. Basically, like I've seen in DCS, you get the throttle up to, like, for example, on the F-15, is up to 97%, and there's like this space on your throttle where nothing happens. But once you push the throttle past that point, the afterburners kick on, and suddenly your fuel goes down like a rock.
You can visually see your fuel tanks lowering.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that you use that like in a pinch. So that should just be part of standard throttle control. But at no point in time should the game just arbitrarily decide that, oh, you should just be going back into SCM or within a certain quote-unquote tolerable range. The idea of flight is pushing that edge, and to do that, you have to be in control of all aspects of your vehicle, and the only thing that you should be dealing with as far as failure is those consequences. So that's my big, I don't know if it's, maybe, you use the word complaint, I guess. I just don't like having a part of the controls, what little that's actually there, pulled out of my hands. And it's literally like having someone across the room, as Lightning would say, and slap the HOTAS right out of my hand.
Yeah.
And say, no.
Yeah. Another thing is there's a lot of games that have assists. You can turn on infinite fuel. You can, have, like in Forza's case, where automatic braking and things. There's a lot of these, like, pseudo-sim games. Maybe they're not full sims, but they're pretty close to it. They have assists. And in Star Citizen's case, also squeaky chair, they would have the G-force, thing, and that is something that sits there and monitors your total G velocities, right? And there's like a certain peak, you can only peak up to this high, even if it's double. Let's say it's double, right? So I think the highest peak right now with G suits and fighter pilots is about 9 Gs. So if 18 Gs is your double, well, you can still only take that for 1, maybe 2 seconds in the most, and that is when, if you're flying with that G safe on, that is when control is taken away from you, and that'd be when you realize, oh, gee, I can't do X or Y because I would black out. And so as you're flying your ship, eventually, if you want to push that edge, you can take the G safe off, and because you've been flying for a while in this situation, okay, when I do this, it's too much. When I do that, it's too much. Because if you've been flying with it on, the computer tells you that. But you can be like, well, I know I can push for like 1 more second here or half a second here, and you can ride that edge and get better performance.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when we're dealing with the whole top speed issue and the limitation of rotation, like, I understand the game is going to have velocity caps because of network coding. This is kind of a side subject, but something kind of related to it as well. Let's just say that the speed cap's 1,000, and every ship can almost reach 1,000. What I mean by that is that you use a logarithmic curve that, the closer and closer you get to your end goal, the more time it takes to get to the next, like 950, 951, and then going to 952 even takes longer than that. It kind of keeps going. Ships with faster acceleration can reach, have a different curve, and they're able to slowly walk their way towards your ship. Once again, then at that point, you're dealing just with fuel and heat, and it kind of creates the illusion, if you will, of if one ship's chasing the other, where one can potentially catch up because it has a better acceleration curve on that particular comparative curve.
Or
but
maybe
it may not have the fuel, and it may not have the ability to take the heat.
Or maybe it doesn't have a higher acceleration value, but it has a better top speed performance. So let's say you have a super accelerated ship, you'll beat him off the line,
right?
But the other ship that's chasing you, maybe he doesn't have as good acceleration, but he has better top speed performance. Maybe he uses a little bit less fuel. His acceleration values at that top end are higher because he's got a bigger engine. The difference between a small block engine and a big block engine, basically, if you're a mechanic.
Right, and the reason I brought that up is because that goes back to the idea of limiting rotation and not speed. Because if you were to go ahead and let people walk up to that top speed and they wanted to make a turn, say the guy realizes that the other guy's going to catch up to him, there's nothing he can do about it. At that point in time, if he was to just try to maneuver or change direction in whatever way, the game would punish him by quickly slamming him in reverse, so to speak, and letting the other guy catch him just like instantaneously. By just limiting rotation, it changes the way he could like slowly curve off to a direction to kind of maybe head towards a base or something like that. It's not going to punish him as much than it does right now, which is basically just either you got to hold down your boost and burn up your fuel while you're trying to make that adjustment, like all of your fuel, like hardcore, or it's just going to drop you back out. And I don't know. To me, it seems like the idea of even the speed caps, to an extent, it causes problems with the amount of fuel you're going to be consuming. I mean, think about it. It's like driving through a city. Like you get worse mileage in a city than you do out driving in the highway, right? Because you're stopping and starting. You're stopping and starting. Well, if you're dealing with fuel limits, and every time you try to make a maneuver when you're in high speed, what's going to happen? You're stopping and starting. You're stopping and starting. It's going to basically cause problems in when it comes when these limitations start coming in. So they really need to stop messing with the throttle. Let us deal with it, and let pilots be pilots. We don't need all the hand holding. It really feels like that there's just a massive amount of hand holding in Star Citizen. It's just I can't even define. This is like literally like playing. If you've ever played like Forza or if you played Gran Turismo, sometimes it feels like you've got all the assists on. You can see the line around the corner. The wheels don't wear and tear. I know that's being fixed later, so to speak. But it's like it auto brakes at the corners. It's just like it feels like it's like
you're
stop
not
holding my
driving the
hands.
car.
Yeah, it's just too much. It's too much. Piloting is supposed to be a skill that grows, and like my performance between the first day of DCS versus the third, there was a big improvement. I still got a long way to go, but I can feel the improvement. And in Star Citizen, a lot of times I feel I'm fighting the controls, and I don't like that. I want to fly my vehicle. I don't want to fight the controls. Any final thoughts, Lightning?
Oh, well, about 20 minutes ago in the middle of that big, long, uninterruptible sentence, I was thinking of Maverick from Top Gun. I'm going to hit the brakes. He's going to fly right by us.
There you go.
He's going to do what?
Hey, don't expect me to put that clip in here. That'll probably get like a whole video.
Yeah, jeez.
Anything Top Gun, it's just like...
anything Top Gun is instant copyright strike, flags, video was blocked in all countries. Hell, even just saying a quote from there, woof, danger zone.
All right, guys. Well, before we wrap this up, just want to let you know, either Thursday or Friday, we'll be showing off a compilation of our first 3 days together, as I stated earlier. We had like, what, 6 hours of... We had like 6 hours of footage or something like that?
Yeah, I know the third day we flew around
You're
for
not
like
seeing 6 hours of footage.
No, it was like 2 hours the third day that we flew around. Most of that was just flying around. We were just having fun.
Yeah, it's like 20 minutes long. So it's like I took like the best bits. So anyway, guys, that's about everything for this week. Leave your thoughts down below. How do you feel about the iteration of the throttle? How do you feel about having the speed constantly ramp up or ramp down depending upon what you're doing? Do you want to see Star Citizen do something better with throttle, or are you happy with the way it is? I mean, everyone's got their preferences. So, all right, guys. That's about everything. We will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodness gracious.
Great balls of fire.